Welcome and good evening to everyone, or morning and afternoon for some of you. My name is Saida Reem Hussain, and I am the leadership lead at Afrosist, which is a multimedia platform that uses technology for the co-creation of alternative models of training, convening, and empowering African youth. As we have seen and continue to see, the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted lives and communities across the world. But this has particularly highlighted the potential benefit of digital technologies. But it has also exposed the challenges in relation to equitable access to technology and equitable opportunities for young people to advance their learning and skills for life and work. So in an increasingly interconnected world ahead and connected world ahead, today's discussion will explore what is needed for youth to be better prepared for this world, and in particular in terms of the African context. This includes not just the skills needed to prepare young people for evolving work demands, but more importantly, skills to empower young people in their own lives, their communities, and as young leaders of today. Today, ODI has convened young leaders as well as experts from government, research, and sector stakeholders to discuss three key issues. The first is the need for more equitable access for young people to tech, to advance their opportunities of learning of soft skills, leadership, and work. The second is strengthening young people's preparedness for and navigation through life and work, but in the ever-evolving digital and work world ahead, and how learning and education systems and employers can continue to adapt accordingly. And three, a call for innovative collaborations and partnerships among stakeholders needed to support young people in these areas and including young voices in these key conversations. To lead today's discussions, I welcome our panelists who will be able to contribute various perspectives and expertise. Here with us is Jabulo Batha, a young entrepreneur from Volcross, South Africa. Jabulo, welcome. We also welcome Deborah Saki, a young leader from Ghana who is passionate about learning and education. Welcome, Deborah. We also have the pleasure and honor to have here with us Dr. Kevit Desai. Dr. Kevit Desai is the Principal Secretary of the Kenya State Department for the East African Community. Welcome, Dr. Desai. And joining us from ODI is Melanie Pinay, Research Fellow in the Digital Societies Program at ODI. Welcome, Melanie. I'm happy to share that we're expecting over 200 people to join us today across 20 countries, which provides for a truly global conversation. And to join the conversation on Twitter, please use the hashtag #FutureReadyYouth to join us in this very important conversation. Before we begin hearing from the speakers, I would like to first invite Trisha Williams to share a few opening remarks. Trisha is thematic research lead at the MasterCard Foundation, and in this role, she is responsible for building the evidence base to contribute to the Foundation's strategy, addressing the youth employment challenge in Africa. She was lead author of the Foundation's Invisible Lives study and recently oversaw pivotal research on scenarios for employment in digital commerce. Trisha.
Thank you so much. It's a delight to be here with you today. So as you said, I'm Trisha Williams with the research team at the MasterCard Foundation. And the MasterCard Foundation is an independent global foundation working to create a world where everyone has the opportunity to learn and prosper. We're currently working in 7 countries across Africa and with Indigenous communities in Canada. And we're focused on a singular challenge, the challenge of youth, work, and livelihoods. Our goal is to enable opportunities for 30 million youth across Africa by 2030 to have dignified and fulfilling work. So several years ago, we embarked on a new program to support the creation of multi-stakeholder partnerships in Ghana and Uganda. And this was called Youth Forward, and it was laser focused on young people, ensuring that they were at the center of our efforts, as well as surfacing and addressing systemic barriers through the various partners. So I want to first of all thank all the people who took part in the Youth Forward initiative over the past years, including dozens of partner organizations. I believe there's more than 50 across Ghana and Uganda, as well as ODI, the Digital Societies team, and other partners, PDA in Ghana and DRT in Uganda, who led the learning partnership. And most of all, we want to thank the young people who led and participated in the program. So they've constantly been gracious to teach us and show us how they will be the change agents of the future. So more recently, the MasterCard Foundation embarked upon a COVID-19 recovery and resilience program, where we focused on critical challenges related to e-learning, digitalization, and support for small and medium enterprises in the COVID crisis. These are issues that we see as particularly salient in this COVID era, and we're thinking about how do we move from that recovery into resilience building in our future programming as well. One of the things we really take away is that digital engagement has never been more needed or posed such a tremendous opportunity for the future. So we also highlighted digital skills and digital readiness in a recent publication we released on secondary education in Africa, which calls for renewed investment in secondary systems across Africa. And this was a multi-year research effort involving consultations and dialogue with everyone from ministers of education to secondary students themselves. And we really called out a timely and critical opportunity to double down on secondary education. And we see digital skills and investments as critical to this effort. So let me pause there. I won't take up all the time. I really want to hear from the panelists today, and just to echo again our delight and validate the importance of having this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trisha. So after our panel speakers share their round of insights, we will have a round of question and answers. So to all the audience members tuned in, please feel free to share questions through the chat box function on this page throughout today's discussions and today's session. So now let me turn to our first speaker, Jabulu Batha. During the lockdown, Jabulu used his Wi-Fi router as a basis for his business, the NetSpot Internet Hub, selling time on the router to community members so they can access the internet. Jabulu is former participant of the Harambee Project, a social enterprise tackling unemployment in South Africa. Welcome, Jabulu. Please tell us more about your experience.
Thank you, and hello, everybody. Chairperson, the panelists, government stakeholders, and everyone, Dr. Disay, and everyone here today. How can I forget Aaron and Ariana? My name is Njabulu Mbatha, 28 years of age. I live in South Africa, Mpumalanga province, from a very, very, very small township called Volkrust. I grew up there. I live there, knowing and believing that, you know, there's more that I can do to improve, firstly, my digital skills and my society at large. Well, unfortunately, because of the insufficient resources and lack of knowledge and some capability, I, couldn't be more effective as I should be, until I came across Harambee opportunity, which was specifically the entrepreneurial program or training, which took me more than 10 weeks in 1 year. So my life was dramatically changed afterwards by the syllabus Harambee and Sasol had brought to us. So they taught me how to draft, for an example, they taught me how to draft a business plan. I never knew what a business plan is, where to start drafting, like the template of a business plan. So it was a standout for me that, I learned how to, now I can draft a business plan, the marketing strategy, the community survey. As a young entrepreneur, I didn't know that before you can commit yourself into a business, or before you can even start a business, you need to do a survey, especially to a place where you particularly live in. And and to how to present your business, and most importantly, they helped me to register my business, which was something that was stand out for me. I didn't even have an idea, because of the town that I was living in. I never thought it is that important to register your business to be legit in South Africa. And then after 10 weeks, now I had to start my business. January 2020, this year, was more practical than ever before. Now, what I always wanted to do was to have my mini internet cafe in my garage. Finally has to start, properly, in a correct way, registered and informative enough. February was okay to me. Here comes March 2020. After the country's lockdown due to the global pandemic, which was and is still COVID-19. So my business made double of the previous month's profit, because during my survey, I knew well that I had only one competitor, which was totally closed at that particular time. So people came flooding at home, begging me to type this and submit their assignments. It was a standout for me. And other thing that some of the customers needed to connect. I didn't, from the beginning, I started the business because of love and because of eager to know what more could the internet bring to me. But now, when most customers and more customers came into my house begging to connect, and I used my router, my little tiny router, selling time to my customers. And then it was amazing. I myself didn't believe it, but it was amazing. And that is when my community started to recognize me. That is where they started to rely on me. That is where they started to believe in me. So what I would say to youngsters of tomorrow, the youth, they should believe in themselves. They should literally believe in themselves, and whatever dreams they may have, tiny as they can be, in their heads, it can become a reality only if they dream less and act more, which basically means that whatever that you have in mind, whatever the idea may be, you have to start small, start implementing what can be done, start using the resources that you currently have, start using the resources that you have handy at that particular moment. You will go places. So Harambee just brought me, it was a light for me from Sasol. It was a light for me, and I will never forget that. So that is what I would like to share with you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Jabulo. I mean, that's a really inspiring story. I think for me, a follow-up question would be, so you talk, a lot about how now the Harambee Project was very central to you in, not only that awareness, but exposing you to, how to write a business plan, also how to register, and registration for especially like young entrepreneurs is, I think, one of the biggest challenges that we have. So I'd like to ask you, how do you and young people have maybe who've been through sort of the same journey, how do they see government and tech companies, but also other sort of stakeholders working more closely with youth to facilitate more equitable access to programs, or even just tech to help them through these through the process of entrepreneurship?
I think they're doing everything they can in their powers to help us to achieve our goals. Let me just make an example of myself. If I didn't get this particular opportunity to get knowledge on how to draft a business plan, to get knowledge on how to do the marketing, the marketing of your business, on how to manage time, those kind of programs, the government that is bringing to us, it's really helping everyone, not just me, but a lot of people, if they can just pay attention to what the government is bringing to us and value that, take that seriously. Most of the young people, they don't mind that. They don't take serious of these little opportunities. They're not little, actually. They are huge, because look at where I am today because of something that I took serious and acted positively when I find this platform. So yeah, they're doing everything they can. They're bringing the trainings to us. They're bringing the resources to us to actually have access and to have more knowledge on the business field.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to turn to Deborah Saki to speak. And Deborah is the co-lead for education at the World Economic Forum's Global Shapers community in Accra, and is also co-founder of the digital book marketplace Onyocha, and has organized and supported several reading club initiatives for youth and community members. Welcome, Deborah. I'm really looking forward to hearing your experience.
Thank you so much, Saida, and I'm really glad to be here, and I'm really glad to share my experiences and insights with everyone here today. I'll be speaking from the point of view of education and the startup industry here in Ghana. And I think that looking at the increasingly digital world we are going into, and especially preparing young people for the digital world, there are some changes that we need to put into place, starting with education, the kind of education that young people in Ghana and in Africa have access to. Even from the point of view of digital skills education, we see a great divide in the public school system and the private school system here in Ghana. I went to a private school for my basic education, but then I transitioned to a public school for my high school education. And this is a very common trend among young people here in Ghana. So I did realize that my IT education ended at the private school when I was in the private school at the basic school level, because the government and public schools do not have the funding or the resources to keep up the IT education that was going on. So I do remember that in my high school, we had a computer lab, but students were not allowed to access it. It was kept locked at all times because I guess they felt as if we would ruin the computers, we would destroy them. So we never used them and we never had access to that. So this sort of this culture, especially in the public and government schools here, creates a bigger divide between the haves and the have-nots. And that is one of the things that we need to look at. I also think that we need to look at revamping our curriculums to include building of more soft skills in young people. And we are looking at leadership skills, critical thinking skills, confidence, and teamwork. From my personal experience, I found a lot of my education to be very rote, to be just the learning of a lot of facts, learn what the teacher is saying, you go to the exam room, and then you write exactly what it is that you were taught. It was after I was done with the university when I joined the Global Shippers community. So this is a young organization of young people in cities around the world who want to create change in their communities. And I was exposed to different people. I learned to work with many people. I was given the opportunity to carry out my own initiatives. I was supported to carry out my own initiatives. This is where I started the Step Up Literacy projects. That was an initiative to reach out to basic school children in underserved communities and introduce them to literacy and creativity. So it was in the Global Shippers community that I had the chance to do all of this and to develop parts of myself that were sorely underdeveloped. I also found out that going through the public high school system that I went through, I didn't have the opportunity to explore all parts of my curiosities. Once at the age of 14, that's the age that many people in Ghana get to high school. You have to decide what track of education you want to go through. So are you going to be studying only science subjects? Are you going to be studying only visual arts subjects, only home economics subjects? You pick a particular track and then you stay within that track till you're done, and then that sort of influences what kind of courses you will take in the university or the career you go to. So this track system that we have, it sort of prevents young people from exploring various parts of their creativity, and it also prevents us from being very fluid and being adaptable in as we go and as we are getting ready to take on jobs, especially in the digital field. In the startup, another thing that we need to look at revamping is creating a more fostering a very creative and entrepreneurial industry here in Ghana. When I started my digital book marketplace on Neutral Limited, I did receive some help from incubators that were funded in part by the government of Ghana. These incubators gave me access to funding for market validation. They also gave me access to coaching, to mentorship. A lot of these today have strengthened the process, the operations process of the digital book marketplace. And this, we wouldn't have gotten that far if not because of the support that I had when I started out. And so this sort of support needs to move from just being concentrated in the big cities like Accra or Kumasi, moving from urban areas to rural areas so that every person, no matter their background or socioeconomic standing, can get access to support. Because young people across Ghana, across Africa have lots of brilliant ideas. We've shown that we have the energy and the talent to solve our own problems, and we just need the relevant support that's going to prepare us to be ready for our digital world. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. So you speak about, and I think like this is a question that I wanted to ask you, was that there needs to be more support. So I'm just wondering, what other ways can youth initiatives or young people with initiatives like yourself and and like Jabulo, businesses like Jabulo, in what ways can we as young people with these sort of initiatives work in partnership and collaboration with either governments or tech companies or even research institutions to scale up these initiatives to give more young people access to these sort of programs? And so like you rightly said, there is that public-private school inequality, and then we had like the rural and urban area issues in terms of access to opportunities, and then you have refugees as well, who don't have access to some of this tech and these educational opportunities. So just wondering, like, apart from support, so support in what sort of ways can this collaboration scale up these programs?
Thank you very much for the question. I think that the government and these organizations that are providing the support have to go to the people. They have to decentralize the sort of help that is coming our way. There are lots of grassroots organizations that are coming up in these communities. There are lots of young people who are forming their own clubs, whether these are book clubs, whether these are IT clubs. So what needs to happen is that these government agencies and other organizations need to be able to identify and reach out to these grassroots organizations, because they are in contact with the local people. They know the needs of the local people. They know what's already going on, and then they can show these government organizations what further help is needed, what more help is needed, and where they can put in the funding, where they can put in the coaching, and especially the particular needs of the communities involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. And I think that's a nice transition to welcome again Dr. Kevit Desai to the conversation. And Dr. Kevit Desai was, prior to his role as Principal Secretary of the Kenyan State Department for the East African Community, was Principal Secretary of Vocational and Technical Training in the Kenya Ministry of Education. He championed technical and vocational education and training in the private sector, government and development partners' linkages towards transforming Kenya's technical and vocational training platform. He is also chairperson of the Young Scientists Kenya. Welcome, Dr. Desai, and we know you have a wealth of experience in education and in the public sector. What key insights could you share with us today?
Thank you, Sada. Indeed, very inspired to be here with you today and listening to the information that's been provided by both Deborah and Jabulo. I was quite impressed by the word he used, harambe. Harambe is a Swahili word from Kenya and means coming together, joining forces. And indeed, this is what's required, in today's time. While it's extremely difficult with respect to COVID-19 and the challenges we face with this monumental pandemic, on the other hand, there's an incredible opportunity to address those very values to ensure that we make progress with respect to the ability to promote this life, work, link and nexus between our youth. And those values, as you mentioned, promote the ability to find ways in which we find access, as well as equity to skills development, but also the promotion of innovation and the promotion of relevance of skills and education. Within Kenya's context, of course, within the East African context, we see that there are challenges with respect to limited access of information and communication technologies, as well as the challenge, of course, compounded in rural areas with respect to this access and equity, and the issues with respect to technical and soft skills too, to utilize applications. These challenges are further amplified by the fact that there are issues with respect to language barriers. There are almost some 40 plus tribes in Kenya, so you can imagine what is required in order to promote access and equity to education, as well as aspects of information overload. there's a challenge with respect to cybersecurity and the risks pertaining to cybersecurity and crime, and the ability for us to ensure that we're able to control these environments effectively. We can all play a huge role in all of this, and this is what government policy is all about, and trying to find ways in which we're able to create a platform, an ecosystem to promote a wide range of ICT-based programs in local languages to take advantage of community knowledge inherent in various communities and their unique lifestyles and their skills, which have been developed over decades and centuries. There's also the challenge with respect to how to deal with and promote greater technology which is environmentally friendly, the aspects of labor management information systems, as well as the promotion of creativity and resourcefulness and curiosity within these applications. The accessibility to affordable bundles, the cost of internet and technology, as well as the improved bandwidth and connectivity throughout our region. These are challenges, of course, and indeed policy reform and work and collaborative links between the private sector development partner and academia need to resolve this increasingly. The potential, of course, within the region is enormous, the highest number of youth in the world. The dividends with respect to a demographic dividend by way of our youth, their incredible capacities of being curious, creative, and resourceful. These could be easily aligned to solutions, social, economic, and environmental. And the promotion of young people and their exposure, as well as their comparative advantage with respect to the older population, them being more dynamic, being more in touch with some of the challenges that we face. The intergenerational power dynamics between young people and older people. Youth have the potential of becoming hubs of knowledge and thereby building capacity throughout the continent. The opportunities of adaptability. Technology comes very easily to youth and their ability to fully utilize it to their capacities. The issue with respect to soft skills as leaders, the internet has phenomenal potential, not only with respect to simulation and exposure, but also the ability to access educational material, research, and ensure that all is up to date. And this makes a profound difference, in young people, their education and their educational paths. The very important role with respect to equity and involvement is absolutely central in this, and that nexus between the private sector, the world of work, and youth can be established using capacities with respect to ensuring that standards are harmonized throughout regions, thereby promoting mobility, as well as ensuring that we're able to build that environment where standards are developed, implemented, and are accessible by youth. Affirmative action programs, as well as mainstreaming youth in issues of national development and national leadership, mentorship programs, incubation centers, and innovation and creativity centers that see their ideas being implemented and tested in the world, and youth-friendly service points promote the promotion of access. All of this is central. Of course, very critical is the ability to create this multifaceted environment which promotes multiple involvement in standards, and from there, the ability to ensure that that nexus is created towards the world of work and the opportunities that youth have within that life work experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Desai. So just as a follow-up question, it is interesting to me that the educational system, as you know, one of the main stakeholders of the educational system are the youth, and you know, so 18 to in Africa, 18 to 35 years old. So this is ranging from secondary school to higher education institutions, which also include vocational and technical training institutions. How can stakeholders and decision makers continue to begin to ensure that in these conversations of curriculum development, how to prepare youth with soft skills, for example, that youth voices are very much part of those conversations in developing strategies and programs and curricula towards that end? And so like you said, like youth, not only urban youth or like Deborah had mentioned, youth who are privileged. This would be rural youth, and also in particular refugee youth.
I think that this is indeed the crux of the issue with respect to how do we transition into a fully inclusive system that promotes those values that you talk about with respect to access, equity, innovation, and relevance. And indeed, there couldn't be a better time because of the internet, the ability to quickly get online. And this is central and essential in promoting that interactiveness and openness that needs to be used in a way in which you're able to design the standards of competency-based education, for example, and then the implementation parts, as well as, like you said, the development of curriculum to achieve those standards. And finally, that assessment procedure. In all of this, the ability for standards to prevail is absolutely essential to create the necessary trust and the capacities to ensure that young people's curiosity, creativity, and resourcefulness are not wasted. And it's absolutely critical that in this process, standards and capacities are availed in order to find further innovations to achieve that standard. You don't necessarily have to have a fixed curriculum, but as long as you achieve the standards of education, the outcomes, then there's greater flexibility in no matter what language you live in or environment or opportunity. And I think that this is what we need to do to harmonize, to join forces, to promote that Harambe spirit, to work together, to find ways in which we're able to lift this master and ensure that it prevails, throughout the fabrics of nations. It's essential because, yes, of course, communities are full of resources and enrichment, but then again, the whole world is an opportunity, and therefore that right for young people to be mobile is absolutely essential and non-negotiable.
Thank you, Dr. Desai, for sharing your insights. I'd like to now welcome Melanie Pinay, whose background is in monitoring and evaluation and policy analysis in complex contexts and conflict-affected countries. She manages the learning partnership with the MasterCard Foundation's Youth Forward initiative. This webinar today continues the conversation that started in July with a consultation around youth and digital technologies in sub-Saharan Africa. Can you tell us a bit more, Melanie, about the emerging lessons from the COVID-19 crisis for youth programs?
Thank you so much, Saida. It's a real pleasure to hear the other panelists' conclusions today. But first, I'd like to remind that the impact of COVID-19 on young people's lives and livelihood is tremendous and multidimensional. From access to education to employment, but also impact on mental health and the spread of misinformation and news. And the acceleration of the use of digital technologies, including social media, has made a smartphone now a native environment. So Wi-Fi is largely viewed as a large share of people is living in rural areas. But despite these challenges, youth have been a positive force in their
I think we've lost Melanie for a second. One of the challenges of online webinars, even though they somehow bring more access to people, these other the logistical problems that come with them. So we're just going to try and get Melanie back. I think she's coming. There she is. Hi, Melanie. Welcome back.
Oh, I think I disappeared for a second. Can you hear me right now? Is that any better?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. And so despite accessibility challenges in terms of digital technologies, youth have been a positive force in their communities and mobilized through technologies and offline actions such as Deborah, Jabulo, and Saida. And others have been supporting their communities using tech by fighting against injustice. A recent example of that is the hashtag #EndSARS, launched by a decentralized youth-led movement against police brutality in Nigeria. And in this instance, youth have tapped into digital tools such as social media for advocacy purposes and organizing offline actions with about 150 million tweets using the hashtag by late October. But not only. For their fundraising efforts, Feminist Coalition opened its donation channels to Bitcoins, who accounted for more than a third of total donations. But to get back to the global consultation, which we held back in July, we were looking at investigating the intersection between youth and digital technologies in sub-Saharan Africa. And then we gathered about 130 participants from almost 40 countries, primarily in sub-Saharan Africa. And there was a large consensus among participants that for youth to be meaningfully involved in African digital transformation, there was an urgent need to develop a digital ecosystem involving education and basic education skills, policy informed, and infrastructures. And the topic of this seminar on digital skills needed for the future, we need to remind that digital skills can mean a lot of different things, and they can range from developing an app that is probably not in every young person's reach, to using social media platforms to market or sell one's products. But now the question is, where are young people at in the digital skills ladder, and how are they acquiring those skills, and what skills might they need? But also, it shouldn't only be about digital skills, but about the skills needed for a digital world, and the skills not only to be ready for work, but to become active citizens in this new normal. And some of them have been mentioned earlier by co-panelists, such as problem solving and creativity, adaptability, confidence, and teamwork, or also leadership and advocacy, storytelling to tackle social issues in young people's community. Other include data literacy and data fluency to avoid misleading statistics and to be able to make sense of the data in media. I think someone also mentioned media literacy and critical thinking, but also understanding digital identity to address fraud as internet consumers are increasingly interacting with businesses and government services online. But other life skills and soft skills are important too, such as personal hygiene, sexual and reproductive health, legal rights, the notion of gender and social norms, and financial literacy. Another question we asked participants was about the barriers to building digital skills for youth and what was preventing the gap closure in the digital divide. How can we go about it? And 4 areas globally came out. So the first one was that young people want a political will and commitment to investments to make the tools available for them to be equipped with digital skills from primary through to secondary to respond to dynamic demand, but also from employers whilst on the job. And second, there is also a need for innovative partnerships, which we mentioned earlier, to bring all actors around the table to collaborate on initiatives to equip young people with the skills needed in the job market, but with youth at the center of this conversation. And third, ensuring inclusion and accessibility based on the format and the content and the language of this learning, using alternative systems such as mixed mass media like TV and radio and print and press, but also mobile phones like WhatsApp and transcribing content to video and photo so that all audiences can have access to this content. And teachers need urgent retraining and they need to adapt this face-to-face interactions to digital means today. And finally, thinking about the unintended consequences of technology. We all well know that technology is not neutral. So the power and the purpose of technology needs to be challenged. techniques to have greater input from individuals from diverse backgrounds to address implicit and explicit bias in data. And for example, regional hubs for tech could be created outside of the Silicon Valley to design technology by Africans for Africans in local languages, but also to develop hardware and software that are not exclusively restricted to Apple or Android devices, and finally using indigenous knowledge systems. And one last point to wrap this up. When thinking about digital transformation, it is important to deliberate about the skills and the expertise and the competencies needed for the future work as we're doing today. But it is also crucial to put values and ideals of a global societies in which young people are aspiring to at the center of this conversation. And this can include, for example, the SDGs and people-centered investments, not only business consideration, and gender equality and solidarity towards marginalized individuals and minorities, as well as those from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And finally, which was mentioned earlier, the environment, the young people we inherit from, so very much encouraging sustainable investments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melanie. So the question that I want to ask you, I think, is a question that I've been sitting with a lot with AfroZist as a leadership program. How do governments and educational stakeholders work towards, yes, more digitalization in terms of education and learning, but how do you do that and introduce soft skills within a digital sort of space for young people? And in your experience with like EdTech, do we lose something being online and trying to prepare young people with soft skills?
I think it should be a combination of both. And something that's quite important, and I think that's been mentioned before, was to also involve all the different stakeholders around that table, primarily youth, which are the main stakeholders who are actually going to be benefiting and receive these different policies and programs. And I suppose one thing that we should capitalize on at the moment, given COVID and the increase of use and acceleration of digital technologies, is to leverage government youth strategies. So a lot of governments have these strategies, but they're not necessarily budgeted for, or there isn't quite so much metrics to measure how things are going. And for those who have youth ministries, for example, they don't always have the power to connect or collaborate with other ministries within the government. So I think putting that back in the agenda and using the different youth strategies and putting youth at the center should be your priorities. And in terms of online and offline, I think the different soft skills will help both online and offline actions, but it can't be one of the others. I think they have to be very much integrated one with the others.
Thank you, Melanie. So I'd like to, before we open the question and answer session, I'd like to invite the audience to take part in a poll, and we'd like to know from our audience their thoughts on the following question, which is: what skills should be prioritized for youth to be better prepared for life and work in the next decade? So the question is, what skills should be prioritized for youth to be better prepared for life and work in the next decade? And you should be able to see the poll to be able to vote in the chat room. Okay. So as people vote, we'll start taking questions from the audience. So please share your questions in the chat room below the webinar screen. And I know some of you have already been sharing some great questions, and we encourage you to continue sharing questions throughout the chat room function. And in advance, we apologize if we don't have enough time to answer all of the questions. So let's start sharing questions and let's vote. Okay, so we're getting questions coming in now. So thank you to all the audience and the speakers for sharing your collective questions and insights. So the question is, and this question is to any of the panelists, what is the most important thing that the governments or other agents could be doing to ensure we are including youth in conversations moving forward, and what would be most effective? So maybe I could throw this question to Dr. Desai. What is the most important thing that governments or other agents could be doing to ensure we are including youth in conversations moving forward?
Thank you. Indeed, the ability to create that interactive ecosystem between the youth by way of in the mainstream of opportunities with respect to soft skills as well as core skills that are required. And I believe that the ability for them to be involved in the entire value chain of education, from setting the actual standards, the measurement of what needs to be learned, and all the way through to the mentorship programs and opportunities that they have for simulation exercises. Now, of course, there's a challenge here that we face as governments. Indeed, we're too heavily involved in investing in the current systems. And that transition to innovation, that transition to transformation is always a challenge. And this is why collective capacities need to be brought together in order to create that new ecosystem that we're able to transition our existing policy structures and so on into implementation. Most governments realize, that indeed the issue of relevance, quality, access, and equity are central to their policy development, their legislation, their ability to strategize, and so on. But that transition is always a challenge, and I think that it requires multiple stakeholders. It cannot be just done by government alone. And that is why the youth can play a role in this in promoting that leadership, that ability to champion and promote that capacity for stakeholders to understand that they need to invest in education and skills and find ways in which we're able to ensure that ICT is fully integrated at all levels of educational development.
Thank you, Dr. Desai. I'd like to hear from Deborah and Jabulo. How have you done this? How have you tried to push that barrier and to ensure that you and other youth are included in some of these conversations moving forward?
Saida, you go first. Ladies first.
Deborah, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, you mean Deborah.
Deborah.
Right. So I think, yeah. Yeah, I think that young people are on their own taking some initiatives that fit into the needs of their community, and then these initiatives tend to draw attention of government bodies or NGOs towards the work that they are doing. So in being responsible, as young people seeing themselves as agents of their own development, of their own growth, deciding to take up the responsibility to develop themselves and their communities is one of the ways that we can draw even more attention to ourselves and get even more help that we would need to continue to develop ourselves and our community. So it all begins with seeing ourselves as agents who are capable of doing something, of enacting change. And then from there, we can move to getting support from outside.
Jabulo?
Definitely, Deborah. Yes, thank you, Saida. Definitely, Deborah, you're right. It is basically, we need to know as young people that education is key and information is power. So the more we have knowledge as young people, the more we get educated, the more we relate our skills, our soft skills, our digital skills with field knowledge, then we can do whatever there's nothing that can stand in our ways. So I definitely agree with Deborah and Dr. Kevet that we need to make sure that we teach or we give. How can I put this? But we need to make sure that soft skills are taught, and we strengthen our digital skills. That will make sure that every young person out there, they know that they have to be part of the change that needs to happen in the world.
And perhaps, Melanie, we could extend the question to you from your experience in especially conflict areas. How do you think governments can, in more practical ways, include young people in these conversations, and how can young people in conflict areas push some of these barriers and ensure that they are on the table?
I think first there is a need to also talk about trust in between different actors, and I think COVID has also shown that intergenerational trust is eroding. So very much bringing these different individuals and groups of individuals, young people and other actors, including government actors, together on the same table. So it's very much about building and strengthening this trust for that, so that both sides sees the value of communicating and engaging with the others. And so that is both valid for conflict-affected countries and non-conflict-affected countries. But essentially, I will go back to what Kendall and Deborah were saying, that young people can only be seen as passive and not educated and waiting. I think that there is a lot of potential and a lot of young people already very active that only need a little push and a bit more infrastructure and help in terms of developing these different skills. So I think we also need to change the narrative around young people, which is, I think, changing through COVID and the different experiences, as we've had to rely heavily on young people to go about different actions being offline or online during the crisis.
Thank you, Melanie. So Deborah, there's a question for you from the chat. So can you share a bit with us on the perspectives of other young people and children you have worked with in your various community projects? And so it's a two-part question. Second part is, what challenges have they observed in equitable access and participation in skills learning, and what might be working and what is not working?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'll speak in regards to the last literacy project that we carried out, which was the Step Up Literacy Initiative, where we worked with many young basic school children from the first grade to the third grade at a community library here in Accra. And one of the things that I noticed was that in order to get the kids to attend these programs, we needed to reach out to their caregivers or their parents. So we have the barrier of parents who, some of them may not necessarily see the benefit that their children are going to receive because they themselves have not been educated, or they themselves do not understand the value that education is going to bring to their children. So first, we realized that we had to work or target their parents, target their caregivers, put in work for them to understand why they had to come. And we had to go beyond that to making sure that we could provide buses that would bring the children from their homes to the libraries, because they do not have, these kids or their families did not have the necessary resources to bring themselves. So that's a very big gap, even if they do realize the importance of education or the importance of being involved in community projects. Not having the resources is a very big barrier that would prevent them from participating. So we also had to make the resource available. So that was food, that was books, that was free transportation. So beyond education, we also realized that there's a big gap in resources, and we have to work to make sure that these resources are distributed equitably and equally for all people to get access to the educational initiatives that we put out. Thank you.
Thank you. So one follow-up question for Dr. Desai is, as we can all observe, there are many public and private partnerships across the region, but from your many experiences and experiences and observations. Could you share any examples of innovative collaborations among government actors and private sector, especially which have worked or are currently working to ensure more equitable access to digital platforms and skills learnings?
Yes, indeed, there are many, many different forms and dimensions towards ensuring that we're able to promote that link between various stakeholders, the world of work and the youth and the academia. One of the very exciting initiatives that is occurring in the eastern part of Africa is a science movement. It's called Young Scientists Initiative. It's modeled under and after the Irish model of the Young Scientist Initiative, and that brings mentorship programs together on a weekly basis in Kenya's context to ensure that professional people, different disciplines of science, whether it's economics or engineering and so on, are able to interact with young people, thereby promoting that necessary mentorship and guidance. It works both ways. Mentees benefit in terms of an experience and inspiration of how young people are approaching issues, as well as their interest and their excitement over the field. And indeed, the mentors, of course, also are able to appreciate the excitement and inspiration of youth. And so I think that these are good examples. There are examples of how the private sector, the industrial sector, works together towards achieving standards, as well as ensuring that they're able to align to the necessary requirements to promote greater efficiency and productivity in education, but then leading all the way up to assessment, where they're involved in verifying education outcomes. And I think these are excellent examples of how greater collaboration takes place. One of the key opportunities here within this context and this time of transformation, in need of transformation, is to literally think of no boundaries and ensuring that we're able to create that capacity where we're not controlled by boundaries, but ensure that we pay homage as nations to one of the greatest natural resources on earth, which are the youth, and how we're able to create that ecosystem to ensure that we work on a boundaryless system towards harmonization of standards, as well as curriculum and other kinds of key aspects.
Thank you, Dr. Desai. So there's a question from an audience member. How do you think governments and UN organizations can ensure youth skilling initiatives are inclusive for youth with disabilities? So maybe we can start with Melanie, so I'll just repeat the question. How do you think governments and UN organizations can ensure youth skilling initiatives are inclusive of youth with disabilities?
I think organizations have tried in the past to, do gender mainstreaming and youth mainstreaming and look at, the different vulnerabilities and ways that young people can be marginalized, to include them and to ensure that youth inclusion is representative to all youth. I think this should be in the continuation of that. So basically looking at the different types of vulnerability and how to address them. So for example, for young women and some of the programs that we've been leading is through our partners have been leading through the Youth Forward initiative. In male-dominated sectors, for example, it has been really challenging to involve young women. So look at the barriers. Why are they not involved? Or if they are involved, why could you not retain them? So I think to actually find these answers, you need to go to these people directly. So you need to go to these young women. In this case, you need to go to young people with disabilities to ask them why, is this program not adapted to you, and how can we make it in a way that is going to further include you into society and make you thrive. We can't just always assume and make those assumptions. I mean, we can, as much as possible in theories of change, and basically try to look at the different assumptions and risks. But at the end of the day, it's also by asking people what would work for them and how and include them in this conversation to adapt based on their needs. So I would very much, again, encourage inclusion through asking these different stakeholders what is their primary needs. And in the context of this conversation, I think it's also important to put it back to what tech are we using? Is the different applications or digital technologies that we're using accessible in terms of different types of disabilities? And for the moment, they are not. For the majority, they're not accessible to a young person living in a rural area without access to the internet, let alone a person with disabilities. So I think it has to be a bit both ways. So anticipating and including people with disability in the conversation to respond to their needs directly.
Thank you, Melanie. I'd ask the same question, I think, to Dr. Desai. How do you think governments and UN organizations can ensure youth skilling initiatives are inclusive for youth and with disabilities?
Indeed, the important role of UN organizations and NGOs are really in the category of intermediary organizations, and they create that link between the world of work, the private sector, the educational institutions, and the youth. And they have this capacity to promote the necessary transformation and innovation, which is part of the challenge in moving to a new ecosystem, promoting rapid transformation based on very dynamic situations, for example, like COVID-19, and what the pandemic has done in terms of promoting greater fragmentation and disunity in various structures and systems. So their role with respect to promoting access, equity, quality, and relevance is absolutely critical. Their role in addressing that necessary link to ensure that all areas of education are covered, both for disability and so especially enables youth as well as normal youth. I mean, these are absolutely critical, that the role that they play is to ensure that link, that ability to address that, education isn't necessarily about supply and demand. It's about co-creation. That intermediary link, an intermediary connection can only be achieved through these organizations that are putting their efforts at the frontier of innovation and transformation, and have that ability, should they wish to choose, to create that link between different institutions which otherwise operate in certain cases like silos. So very critical role, and indeed need to be encouraged and need to be emphasized with respect to their performance and their responsibility to create that collective responsibility and action towards these solutions.
Thank you. So another question from the audience to possibly, so let's go Jabulo this time and then Deborah. What is the role of the private sector, particularly tech companies, if any, to help boost youth digital skills? So I'll repeat the question. So Jabulo, what is the role of the private sector, particularly tech companies, to help boost youth digital skills?
Well, I think that the role of the private sector is to literally uplift. The private sector is there to uplift and to empower the youth. So the role of it is to actually to make the youth more access to the platforms that were not accessible. So yeah, the private sector is literally there to boost and to uplift youth and to put them in a place where they could really think of think out of the box to implement, to invent new things to change the world. So especially on the digital skills, we know that most of us, most of young people in Africa, worldwide, global, they don't have those particular skills, the digital skills. So I think that the private sector can come in there to enhance, to boost youth to have more access to such opportunities like digital skills.
Thank you very much. And I think that the private sector has the responsibility to give back in any way they can. And this can be whether it's startups or very large, already established technology companies. They have to give back in any way they can. There are instances where in Ghana we have people who have advanced in technology coming back to offer maybe free coding classes or free programming classes for young people, especially in underserved areas. And many of these initiatives don't take a lot to start. So we find that people are giving back in any way they can. What tech companies have to do is to realize how far their own skills and resources have sent them. They also have to realize that they rely on the rest of the population to make profits. And so they also need to bring the rest of the population up to speed with whatever it is, with whatever skills that the population needs to catch up. The private sector also has a responsibility to prepare young people for jobs and to mentor them in such a way that they're able to fit directly into the new industry that are coming up. So I think that private sector just has to give back in any way. It doesn't have to be large scale. It can be with whatever resources are available. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. So there's another question, and we'll address this to Dr. Desai, although Dr. Desai, you've already touched on this a little bit. So the question is, in your experience, how can government and development agents leverage the talent of young African leaders, but at the same time avoid an elite bias and engage in meaningful ways, also with other underdeserved groups?
Indeed, we need to invest a lot more in education. We need to ensure that ICTs prevail throughout the entire educational system. It's a tool, it's a technology that promote greater productivity and efficiency and innovation in its application. The central thing here is to ensure that we're able to find ways in which we promote innovative approaches. The ability for us to, in particular, look into these various special traits that youth have, and from any situation, whether it's endowed or less endowed, those traits of curiosity, creativity, and resourcefulness have to always be nurtured and have to be applied to promote the greatest empowerment and appreciation of these very essential talents. And governments and the development partners can play a role. They can play a role in promoting activities outside the education value chain, like, for example, supporting science at a very young age to encourage young people to appreciate science by way of exhibitions, mentorships, simulations, and all the other areas that can provide imagination for a young person who is in the remotest part of a village in Africa to imagine a pathway to opportunity. And this needs to be created, and this is their role, to create that ecosystem, to ensure that access is available, that equity is there in all the structures and opportunities that exist. That, the world of work also has that ability to appreciate that on one hand, of course, They rely on productivity, innovation, and efficiency for their profits, their sustainability, their transformation. But they need to invest. They need to invest in that foundation because, after all, they're at the frontier and they need to create that link from the frontier of their challenges to the opportunity of solutions which are there in the youth. And so their role in creating links and ensuring that they're involved becomes absolutely critical, and move more from a CSR perspective to a perspective of responsibility, of collective responsibility. And I think only then will we create that nexus, that link between the world of work, the opportunity, and youth.
Thank you, Dr. Desai. So there's a question from Linda, who's in the audience, and we'll address this to Melanie. So she asks, given that approximately 70% of Africans are offline, how do we strive to ensure that no one is left behind in the evolution of digital life and work, particularly in remote work, and particularly given that access to internet is costly?
I think that's a great question, and there's a really good point about costs, which is a huge issue. For example, how can we accept that how we 1 gigabyte it's very access to a number of people. So the main answer to this question is we need to make universal access to the internet. Oh, can you hear me right? It seems that it's coming up. Is that any better?
Yeah, that's better.
So I think there's a need to create an environment to increase market competition for different telecoms to lower the price of data and also to offer different packages. So one thing that came out of the consultation was that in some sub-Saharan African countries, the packages were only daily or weekly or monthly, but there needs to be a bit more diversity in terms of this. And in the context of COVID, exposure to new products to those who originally couldn't afford data could potentially in the future boost its demand. So making some in areas like Ghana, I think there was better access to internet with free internet access in specific platforms. So this is quite important in terms of accessibility and cost, but we also need to think about the digital divide's impact on mental health and the social fabric generally. One comment from the consultation I can remember was that when data was cheaper or free at night, for example, then young people were more inclined to browse the internet overnight, which is not ideal in terms of only people having access at night. But also explain to young people and the population generally how to manage and use data bundles so that it doesn't become an issue in terms of financial access. So yeah, short answer is internet needs to be accessible to more people. Otherwise, there's not going to be better progress in terms of digital skills or access to work.
Thank you, Melanie. So there's a question for Deborah from the audience. Deborah, what is your top tip for young women who want to start a business or a startup or a social enterprise?
I think that we cannot downplay the role of mentorship for young women that want to start something, whether it is a business or a social enterprise. Mentorship or social circles are very important because we have many young women now who are trying to penetrate into areas that were traditionally for men, that are going to need hands to guide them, are going to need shoulders to step on, are going to need people to tell them how to demand what is rightfully theirs, how to be more confident, going to need people to tell them that they are welcome in the spaces they find themselves in. So I think one of the things that young women should look out for is finding older women who can mentor them, who can guide them, who can give them access to the right networks and advice that they would need. And I think that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. So even though this question was to Deborah, maybe let's ask the same question to Jabulo. We'd like to hear what top tip do you have for young aspiring entrepreneurs or social enterprises? Sorry, Jabulo, can you hear me? So the question is for you. What tip do you have for young aspiring entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs? Oh, I think we've lost Jabulo. Not a problem. So maybe we could move to possibly hearing some closing remarks from our esteemed panelists. And I'd like to thank you again, the audience for tuning in, and our speakers for sharing these collective questions and insights. So we could start with Deborah, and then move to Dr. Desai, and then Melanie, and then when Jabulo comes in, we can hear some closing thoughts and remarks. Deborah?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. I'd like to say that in closing, we've seen that young people across Africa have both the energy, the talent, and the desire to solve our own problems. We've seen that it's going to take collaboration on the parts of young people themselves, on the parts of governments, on the parts of the private enterprise to help us all get to the point where we are ready to take on the jobs, ready to define our future, ready to create our own future. I think that young people especially also have to see themselves as I said earlier, agents of their own development and be willing to put in the work that it takes for us to be ready for whatever the future is going to bring to us. Thank you so much, and it's been nice listening to all your perspectives and insights today.
Thank you, Jabulo. Jabulo, could you give your final thoughts or remarks? Or maybe Dr. Desai, while we try and get the connection back.
Thank you very much, and thank you all. Indeed, it's been inspiring to be with you, to be part of this conversation on education, skills, and work. And I would probably say this, that indeed these are very difficult times, but there's also an opportunity to do something about the challenges. And indeed, we need to see to it that we work together. It reminds me of an old African saying, it takes a village to bring up a child. Maybe we can add that, it takes continents to develop an ecosystem of joint responsibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Melanie?
Can you hear me all right? Is that any better? Yeah, okay. I think I'll close down with one quote from one participant of the consultation back in July, which was that not everyone still understands what technology can do for them. And I think that's quite important in the sense that it can do a lot of things, and it is quite a shame that we don't provide these opportunities to everyone at this stage, and they don't see what technology can do for them, particularly in the sense that it can facilitate communication of different opportunities and ideas, and how information can be used to improve young people's lives and livelihoods that are not just realistic and within the reach of their aspirations, but that works with what they can do generally, and this should be something that is in everyone's reach. So very much hoping that internet will be accessible to everyone to be able to benefit from what it can bring to them.
Thank you, Melanie. I think we're just getting Jabulo back online. So I think let's just give him like a few seconds. Hi, Jabulo, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you, Saida. Can you hear me?
Great. Yes, I can hear you. So
All
before we lost connection, there was a follow-up question from the audience that was asking if you had any top tips for young social entrepreneurs. So maybe you could start with that and then give us your closing thoughts or remarks.
All right. I would say that as a young entrepreneur, I did something that comes from my heart. I did something that I love, something that I had passion for. Don't do anything that you copied from a friend or that you copied from your neighbor, or maybe you saw an opportunity of maybe more cash in that. So do what you love. Do what you have passion for. That's my tip. Go for what you love. Go for what makes you smile every morning, every day. Then you will do better in entrepreneurship. And then my remarks would, sorry about that. My remarks would be, thank you very much for this platform. I learned a lot from Dr. Kevet, and thank you, Sayeda, Deborah, and Melanie. Thank you very much. I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot today. Thank you very much for having us on this platform. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jabulo, and thank you to all the panelists for your closing remarks and for sharing your insights today. So I'd like to close, possibly as a, take chair privilege, just a few insights of my own to close. So, we hope obviously that the discussion today has contributed to emphasizing, many challenges that young people face when it comes to accessing digital, digital platforms that develop their skills in not only their life, but also in education, in formal education systems, but also highlighting many ideas and examples in working towards a future where you're better prepared for life and for work. So thank you very much, Deborah and Jabulo, for being here. It's been inspiring for me as well. And we also, we look towards having a future where we can have equitable access to quality learning platforms and opportunities. And I'd like to end with something that Dr. Desai said, which really stood out for me, is that education is about co-creation and not about supply and demand. And this conversation here today has been one that's intergenerational. So I think that's very special, and that quote is very powerful. So I'd like to share with you, so remember there was a poll that was conducted earlier, which was what skills should be prioritized for youth to be better prepared for life and work in the next decade. And the poll results are in. And 75% prioritized digital literacy and ICT skills, while 56% prioritized soft skills. This is people, social, and communication skills, and 19% prioritized organizational and analytical skills. So based on, the insights shared by our panelists and audience members, it is clear that African youth from the north of Africa to the south of Africa, but also African diaspora youth, should be in spaces and platforms for their voices to be heard and acted upon alongside stakeholders. And these spaces must be equitable and inclusive in terms of their design and access, and they must be everywhere across all sectors. Thank you to everyone that joined the conversation today and to everyone that was watching. It was a great pleasure to be a part of this conversation and to be in conversation with all the panelists, and I wish you all the best. Kwaherini.